Welcome to Module 5 over Philosophy of Religion. Philosophy of Religion is a little bit different in that we've kind of done logic, epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics. All of those are kind of our four major branches. Philosophy of Religion is what we might call second-order studies. And so a second-order study is essentially anything that is basically looking at the philosophy of a topic. You can do philosophy of history, you can do philosophy of art, you can do philosophy of, English literature, philosophy of science, things like that. And so this one is focused on religion. It's a pretty popular one. It'd be kind of maybe part of metaphysics too. And it's different than theology. Theology is basically, we have the Word of God, it comes down, and then you analyze it within that concept. But it's very much beholden to the tradition of a religion. Whereas philosophy of religion is basically saying, we're going to unfetter ourselves. We're not going to be restricted. We may take concepts from religion and test them out, but we aren't necessarily, we aren't going to take an authority and say that our concept has to meet with this. It can go its own way. And so what happens is we basically are doing, it's a little bit more unfettered. We may question the concept of God. We may question the concept of faith. We may come to conclusions that are quite questionable from a theological perspective, but it's a free-reigning look at what is God. We're going to look at kind of traditionally arguments for the existence of God, whether or not they're good or bad and strong, what are their problems, what do they leave us with as a concept. And then we're going to look at what's probably one of the biggest problems in philosophy of religion, which is the problem of evil, which is, we all know people who suffer, who have bad things happen, and how do we justify belief in God, who has the ability supposedly to stop this if God is all powerful, to allow for people to suffer the way that they do. And so those are our kind of areas. Now, we have 4 weeks to do it, and this is going to have some lessons. You're going to go through some different things. But one of the first is going to be a discussion board that's a little bit different in that this discussion board is going to ask you to take the Pascal's wager, which you'll get a presentation on. And your job is to find what's good about this argument, what's bad about it. Find a couple things you think are good, find a couple things you think are bad. After you do that, I'll then probably put out a video or a post or an announcement basically saying, okay, these are kind of some of the classic problems, and we'll have a discussion of that. Kind of that's my goal. But I want you to think about it first, about what you see as the problems with Pascal's wager, and just kind of get your own free thoughts. And some of them may be good, some of them may be bad. You don't have to look it up. This is me asking you not to look for critiques or other things. I want you to look and think, what do I find strong? What do I find weak about it? I can tell you there are things that are good about it. There are things that are bad about it. That's just the way it is. We'll go through a couple more arguments for the existence of God, and then we'll do a thing about the problem of evil. And the problem of evil, you have an assignment in which you must act basically like we're going to pretend like we're at trial, and your job is to write an argument, either an indictment or basically like a defense attorney, a defense of God, and like a trial for why God would allow people to suffer. And you can have some fun with it. You can write it more in that form. But you might be saying, okay, that's great. But what if I, what if I don't agree? Like, can I do whichever side I want to do? Can I indict God? No, I will assign half the class to do one and half the class to do the other. Now you might say, but I don't want to do that side. Well, the point is whether or not we agree with a position doesn't mean we shouldn't be able to argue for that position. And it's a little bit of stepping outside ourselves, and I'm not asking this to be what you believe. I'm asking it to be what you argue for. And that's kind of one of the goals that as you become a critical thinker is I can tell you in arguments that I don't agree with that I can find strengths and I can argue that position. I can take, for example, like maybe in local political issues, like there's like they were talking about in the last year building a homeless shelter in Springfield. I fall on one side of that position about the location and everything, But I also understand other people had another, thing, about what they're doing, about the contestant. And I could give you a pretty good argument on both sides of that, of why, it should or shouldn't be built. But I don't agree with one of those sides. It doesn't mean I don't think they have good arguments. I don't think they have good reasons. I'm not saying that because nobody's argument is completely just hogwash. I mean, there are points to it. And so your job is to find a position. And so you may have to argue that God is guilty of crimes against humanity for allowing people to suffer. And maybe you don't believe that. That's fine. There's also a concept within the religious tradition called a devil's advocate. And a devil's advocate, you may have heard people say, like, you're just playing devil's advocate when you're arguing for a position you don't necessarily agree with. But the devil's advocate in religious faith is when you go to canonize, when you go to declare somebody a saint. So right now, in this area, there's a guy named Fulton Sheen who they're talking about beatifying. And when they get to the canonization stage, they'll have a person who will make an argument that he should not become a saint. And that person will be called the devil's advocate. And it's actually a position that is well regarded and one that is an act of great faith to take the position that you will argue against this person as a good person. It's not a bad thing to do it. It's actually a good thing to do that. And so that's kind of what I'm asking you to do, is to make the argument. Even if you don't believe it, that's fine, but make the argument. I'm not going to judge you based on it. And part of the reason is I want people to take arguments. Now, maybe you'll agree with what you're assigned to. That's fine. But I'm not wanting people just to argue for what they believe. I want them to argue for what the philosophers or what the arguments or what the traditions say, not what they say. I'm not looking for you to defend your position. I'm looking for you to defend a position.